One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey everybody, this is the Sales Hacker Podcast, and I am your host, Sam Jacobs. I'm the founder of the New York Revenue Collective, and I'm also the Chief Revenue Officer of an amazing company called Behavox, which is a people analytics behavioral operating system. We can tell you more about that when the time is right. But for now, we've got on our show today John Barrows, and everybody knows who John is. John is the sales trainer that trains Salesforce, and I first came into contact with him years ago at Axial. He delivered an amazing one-day training session titled Filling the Funnel, and we've got him back on the show. And he is just, his enthusiasm for the profession of sales is infectious. And he'll tell you all about how to generate engagement, how to get meetings, how to build pipeline, and how to approach your day in the right way. So we're excited to have John on. But first, we've got our sponsors. We've got AirCall is our first sponsor. They are a phone system designed for the modern sales team. If you're not using AirCall at this point, I honestly don't know what's wrong with you, but to the extent that you need to hear more, they seamlessly integrate into your CRM, they eliminate data entry for your reps, and they provide you, assuming you as a manager, with greater visibility into your team's performance through advanced reporting. When it's time to scale, you can add new lines and minutes, and you can use in-call coaching to reduce ramp time for your new reps. So here's the website to go to, aircall.io/saleshacker. That is aircall.io/saleshacker to see why Uber, Dun & Bradstreet, Pipedrive, and thousands of others trust SalesHacker with their most critical sales conversations. Our second sponsor is Outreach.io, the leading sales engagement platform. Outreach triples the productivity of sales teams and empowers them to drive predictable and measurable revenue growth. By prioritizing the right activities and scaling customer engagements with intelligent automation, Outreach makes customer-facing teams more effective and improves visibility into what really drives results. Hop over to outreach.io/saleshacker to see how thousands of customers, including Cloudera, Glassdoor, Pandora, and Zillow, rely on Outreach to deliver higher revenue per sales rep. Now, hold on one more second, because I want to thank a few people that have reached out to me for listening to the podcast. Here they are: Anthony DeGraw at Domain Computer Services, James Rose, who reached out to me to talk about the London Revenue Collective, Mick Dinnan at Outboundify, Kevin Enriel, hope I said your last name right, Kevin, at Annex Cloud, and then Jay Williams from Argyle. Those are all listeners that have chimed in and said, hey, we appreciate what you're doing, and I want to say thank you. And if you've got feedback or new guests that you want us to host, or questions you want me to ask, please let me know. I love feedback. My wife gives it to me all the time. It's just wonderful. So without further ado, let's listen to John Barrows.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Sales Hacker Podcast. We've got a very special guest today. My guest today is John Barrows, who most people that I know in the sales world and the startup community already know who he is. I've known about him for a couple of years. I've worked with John at most of the companies that I've worked for over the past. We first met him at Axial. He then came into Livestream and did a conversation with us and did a training with us. And then he did a training with us when I was at the Muse. So I've known John for a long time. He's been one of the top sales trainers and sort of sales thought leaders in the startup ecosystem. And he is the founder and owner of J. Barrows Consulting. He teaches both prospecting, and I'll always remember his filling the funnel session, but he also teaches a bunch of other strategies and mechanisms, which I use to this day. One of them is the give to get scorecard. So John is out there in the sales world. I think one of his favorite and famous mantras is he teaches Salesforce how to sell, which I think was a thing that he walked around Dreamforce handing out business cards and talked about a couple of years ago. And we're just super excited to have him on the show. So John, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, Sam. It's awesome to connect with you here because we do have a history, and also Sales Hacker in general, man. You know, I've been following what Max has been doing ever since he got this thing started. So I love what you guys are doing in the community you built here, trying to elevate the profession. So hopefully we can drop some knowledge today that people can get some value out of.
That is the goal, and anybody that knows Max knows that he's one of the world's top hustlers. So we're excited. We're all eager and excited to be part of the Sales Hacker world. I know you pretty well, and a lot of other people do as well, but it would be useful, John, to hear a little bit about your background to frame your context and figure out, how did you get into sales training? As you talk about, you are one of the sales trainers that's a true sales practitioner, and you do sales every day when you're building pipeline or going through your selling motions. How did you get into this line of work?
Yeah, it's not something I planned. I will say that. It's an evolution, right? I mean, I got my degree in marketing because back 20 years ago, there was absolutely no degrees in sales. Now, thankfully, there's at least a few out there. And started with DeWalt, then Xerox. And that's really where I got my true sales education, selling copiers. It's brutal. And by the way, I sold copiers to the government, so it was even worse. And I learned at least how to take rejection, if nothing else. And then I started a company doing outsourced IT services. So I was like 25. A few of my buddies, we got together from high school and started an outsourced IT services company. And, I was 25, so I didn't know what I was doing. So I took every training, right? Sandler, Miller, Hyman, Taz, Spin, all of it. And I came across this company called Basho, and it was the first training that really resonated with me because it was very tactical. It was not this huge theory or, role play driven. It was super tactical. And I love that because I'm a pretty keep it simple, stupid guy, right? So I used it, grew Thrive up, sold it off to Staples, and then was looking for a new role. And Basho, the training company, offered me a position to be a trainer. And I was like, no, I don't think so. Because up until that point in my career, the only type of sales trainers I had come across were either failed sales professionals or professional presenters. And right, and if you've ever if you ever taken a training, I mean, I think other professions you can get away with going through the slide deck and really just being a good presenter. But sales, you can sniff out a bullshit sales rep, trainer all day, every day, right? Because I will tell you right now, it is way easier to tell people how to do this stuff than it is to actually do it. And again, if you've ever been in a training where you can tell, like, either they've never done it or they did it 20 years ago, right? Yeah. I think that's the problem with this industry right now is that you got all these super old school trainers still training, methodologies that were 30 years back. I wanted nothing to do with it, but they were like, don't worry, you have to use these techniques to sell so you can train, so you can get paid. And since sales is more my passion than anything else, I was like, okay, I like the whole practice what you preach thing. So I got on board with them, and then 2007 hit, and the economy just got crushed, and new CEO restructured the company, to put it lightly, fired 30 of the 35 of us one day, and went all in on software and left the training on the side of the road to die. And so I've always said I'm not the smartest cat out there by any stretch, but I'm definitely an opportunist. And I walked into his office and was like, hey, that kind of sucks. So just out of curiosity, what are you going to do with the training? And he was like, I don't know. What do you think I should do with it? I'm like, shit, can I have it? Yeah, take it. So, I mean, a little bit more than that, but not much. And so I split off I started Kensei Partners with one of the other senior trainers. And then about 5 years ago, went off on my own, just because I've always kind of had the bug and the itch to do my own thing. And I'm a total pain in the ass to deal with anyways. So, I think the entrepreneurship, but also more solo consultant approach to me was a lot more appealing. And so now I get to go play around with a lot of the SaaS companies. So Salesforce, yes, they're still my biggest client, but LinkedIn, Box, Dropbox, Okta, Aptus, Google, like I've trained a lot of those companies, and it's fun, right? I love playing in the tech world because, or SaaS specifically, because SaaS pushes the envelope from a tech standpoint, but it also is from a sales standpoint. Right. If I'm training Salesforce on the same stuff I was training them on 2 or 3 years ago, there's no way they're renewing my contract. And so it forces me. And that's why I say I'm not really a trainer. I'm a sales rep that happens to train. And so I sell every day, and I translate that into the training for the reps to hopefully have some real world examples that they can, learn from.
Well, I'll always remember the first time you came into Axial and everybody walked out of there thinking it was sort of the best day that they've ever had in a sales training environment. And again, part of it is because you gave so many actual, useful, practical examples. My question is, how'd you figure out this formula? Because you left your old shop and it feels like it's not an overnight success. You work your ass off, but every year it's bigger and bigger. Every year there's more substance to the J Barrows platform. Was there a moment? Was there a first client? Was there a light bulb that triggered it when you went on your own that you knew you were going to be successful? Or were you always just so determined that no matter what, you were going to make sure you won?
I think it's more the latter, man. There's no light bulb, to your point. There's no overnight successes. There's no, and usually the ones that don't last. It's funny. Everybody asks you, what's the secret to success? And I'll say, my answer to that is working your ass off. I'm not the smartest kid out there. I went to a state school, drank my way through 4 years of college, but I'll outwork you. You know what I mean? Like I got no problem. Even to this day, I'm 42 years old. I usually work 16, 17 hours a day, 6, 7 days a week. And I travel, 150 days a year type of thing. Now with my daughter, I got a 7-year-old daughter, and I keep going back to my parents and asking them like, hey, what did you do? Like when I was growing up, did you do anything specific to instill a really strong work ethic? And they don't really have any answers. I really wish they did, so I could really translate that to my daughter. But for some reason, I've always been driven to be successful, right? Early on, that manifested in money. When I was a kid, my mom said I was always very money driven, and so as I wanted to make money so I could buy the things that I wanted to buy. But as I've matured, it's way more about success, and success is a different definition for everyone. I'm a big goal setter. I'm somebody who's focused on continuous improvement. I live my life by the rule of 1%, which is you set the bar at a high but attainable level. And then once you reach that bar, don't just throw up another mountain to climb, but you just do a 1% better every single day. And if you can genuinely look at yourself at the end of that day and say, I was better today than I was yesterday, then it's going to be hard not to be successful. That's the mentality. I will say, and this, I probably have 4 or 5 calls a week for people who are thinking about getting into, their own business or being an entrepreneur. And I tell them, I go, that first client is definitely the key. Early on, it's a challenge, right? Because you're trying to find money you're trying to just pay the bills. So you'll do any work for anybody. But my recommendation is you find that one client that has somewhat of a logo and really fits your ICP, and you go all in on whatever you're trying, and you try to give them, and don't give it away for free, but if you have to, you do, but discount or whatever, but get testimonial, get a case study from them, because once you have that logo, everything else becomes a lot easier. And you said it earlier, I trained Salesforce how to sell. When Basho split, I vividly remember sitting in the boardroom with the other 2 trainers who we were going to start Kensei Partners with, and all the logos, right? Basho had some insane logos. It was Gartner, Forrester, Symantec, Salesforce, SAP. I mean, for a small little training company, the logos were bananas. And us as trainers, we were splitting them up, right? Because now we were taking over basically. And I remember the other 2 trainers, they were battling over all these other companies. Like, I want SAP. And all I kept staring at was Salesforce. And because this was 10 years ago, right?
Salesforce was the king of the land back then. I mean, they still are, but this was when they were,
this was when they were right on the cusp of it, right? And I'm like, and I knew it. And no matter how bad the economy was, I'm like, you know what? That company's a rocket ship. And I knew it. And so I pretended like I cared about the other companies and, negotiated with the partners about, and I'm like, all right, fine. As long as I can have Salesforce. And I got Salesforce. And what I did was I just overserviced the shit out of them. I did stuff for Salesforce I would never do for anybody else. For instance, I go to Singapore for a day. I leave on Monday here from Boston. I land on Wednesday morning. I train on Wednesday. I come home on Thursday.
I feel like you still do that. I think I saw you like walking through the Singapore airport on Snapchat or something like that.
And guess who that's still for?
There you go.
For Salesforce, right? Because I knew that if I got them as my marquee client, that everything else would be so much easier. And that's what happened. And that's why I live in the SaaS world, because all these little SaaS companies want to be like Salesforce. So when you heard me, going around Dreamforce saying I train Salesforce how to sell to that target audience, are you shitting me? That's a excuse. I mean, we talk about attention grabbers, right? I mean, that's what I'm looking for. Is I'm looking for somebody to say, oh, what? Tell me more about that. And then it led to a really good conversation and kind of where I am today. So I think a lot of that hard work early on has manifested itself into the brand and how I'm building it, and really only taking on customers that I know I can hit a home run with. To your point of that first training that you and I did together, that's what I want. I want reps to walk out of that training going, holy shit, that was the best. I mean, thankfully in sales training, the bar is pretty low, but I want them, because if you walk out going, it was okay. This is way too small of a community here to have that not get around. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and of course the opposite is also true, is that once you've got something good going now, your business explodes. So I want to talk about a couple themes while we've got time together. One of them is the evolution of sales and marketing in general, particularly as it relates to all of these new technologies and how the trade of sales is evolving with the incorporation of artificial intelligence, which I think is something that you've thought and talked a lot about. So, what should we be thinking of as we move into 2018 and 2019 and we've got all these new tools?
Everybody's looking for the silver bullet, right? And it frustrates me because the skill of sales is getting replaced by technology. And so people are focusing less and less on the ability to ask questions and relate to people. And they're focusing more of their attention on whatever cool new tool and technology I can use to send an email. And so I think we need to get a little bit, first of all, back to the basics a little bit on sales, on what really sales is all about. And a couple of things as far as what I think we need to be focusing on. First of all, and I stole this from Gary Vaynerchuk, right? He talks that, everybody says content is king, content is king. He says, fine, if content is king, then context is God. And that to me is sales versus marketing, or marketing versus sales, right? Marketing is content. Sales is context. If we as sales professionals are not putting any context around our content, then we're no different than marketing. And I have no idea why we're getting paid to do what we do. Right? Blasting out template emails with some of these tools like Outreach or SalesLoft or YesWare or ToutApp or whatever it is, like it really drives me crazy that I can even tell when I'm on a SalesLoft cadence versus an Outreach cadence these days, for crying out loud.
How can you tell? What's the difference?
It's the verbiage that they use in the templates, because typically what happens is these clients sign up for these tools and they go to Outreach or SalesLoft and say, hey, can we, because most companies suck at messaging, or at least sales messaging. They're fine with marketing messaging, but sales messaging, they're brutal at. And so they'll go to SalesLoft or Outreach and say, hey, can we see some of your templates, like how you guys do it? And of course, customer success on SalesLoft and Outreach are like, yeah, sure, here you go. And all the companies do is they take those templates, they replace the names, they tweak up the value proposition, they send them out. And they literally press play. And I don't understand what the difference between that and Marketo, Eloqua, Pardot, any one of those is. They're supposed to be sales efficiency tools, but sales reps are using them as sales automation tools. And I really do think right now we're in a transition phase where, I'm going to talk generationally here. So I'm 42, right? We grew up in the numbers game world of sales. It was full blown boiler room, Reco style, make 100, that type of stuff. And so as we've now grown, our generation has grown to be managers and executives and leaders. Look, it's really hard to coach on quality, right? But what I can do is I can manage you towards numbers, right? For me to coach you on the quality of your call and those type of things, that takes a lot of time. And that's unfortunately what most managers don't spend any time doing. But I can tell you to make 50 dials a day. And so we're in this weird world where everybody understands quality is the answer, right? Like account-based marketing, for example, right? Account-based marketing cracks me up because really what account-based marketing is just an admission from marketing that we got to stop spamming people. Like
that's right. It's just more expensive marketing. That's
it's like, oops, we went a little overboard with this whole content marketing thing. Like we got to ratchet that back a little bit. But what's happening now is that sales reps, if you think of where marketing was 5, 6, 7 years ago, where they were really starting on uptick of the spam filter, of the spam, hose, if you will. Now marketing's coming back to, okay, let's ratchet it back. Sales reps are on the upward swing now. Now it's sales reps blasting out all these emails, and you can't tell the difference between a marketing email and a sales email anymore.
So if context is God, to your point, and we want to get salespeople to be better, do you mean just more personalization, create your own template instead of the default template that you're going to get from one of these tools that helps you do, sales efficiency? Or do you mean more than that? Do you mean incorporating different types of outreach? How can a rep listening to this improve their process tomorrow by embracing context?
It's all about what you sell, right? SMB, mid-market, enterprise, those type of things. I'm a big believer in, look, I get it, right? If it was up to me, we'd all have a half an hour to do research on every account before we sent an email or made a phone call. That's just not reality because, again, our generation is forcing, even though we understand quality, we're still forcing quantity, right? So what I really recommend is everybody tier out their accounts, right? You got your tier 1s, tier 2s, and tier 3s. And really not just the basic reasons, right? Oh, they're in these industries and this size, but what are the nuances there? What kind of technologies are they using? What type of competition's in there? And this is where technology is a big benefit because there's a ton of tools out there that can give me really deep insights on what really is this company looks like, right? I mean, tools like Siftery and Owler and those type of things are fantastic tools to give me insights on what's happening in these businesses. So really tiering out your accounts into the, tier 1s, which is the high quality ones, tier 2s, which is the quantity approach, and tier 3s, which are practice or try things out. And then they can segment out, that's their approach, right? So the tier ones, that's a tailored approach. I really do recommend sitting down, doing research, coming up with 5, not just doing research for one, sending one email, but researching the account and finding 4, 5, 6 different things to say about that account all at the same time so you can put together your story. Because it is no longer about the one email, the one voicemail these days. It's about the contact strategy. It's about the story that we tell these people. And so you can map that whole story out in a tailored way, but only to your top tier. Like, I'm not going to do that for every single account. It's just not realistic. But with your tier twos, that's where we can be a little bit more targeted. So tailored at the tier 1 level, targeted at the tier 2 level. And when I say targeted, let's find some type of commonality that a group of people have in your database. So for instance, we could do persona-based stuff where, VPs of sales in the SaaS industry, because just on that alone, right? VPs of sales in the SaaS industry, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go do some research, open up Google and say, what are the priorities, VPs of sales, SaaS industry, 2018? And do some homework to figure out what these people care about. What are the challenges today that these people face? And usually you'll read a blog post about, some common themes of what are challenges. And then you can craft a message and carve up your value proposition to speak the language of that person, right? Because my value to a VP of sales in the SaaS industry that uses Salesforce is slightly different than my value is to a VP of sales in the manufacturing industry that uses Microsoft Dynamics. And if I know that, I can craft my messaging around that and then send out 50 emails at a time to that specific persona. So that's how we can get volume up there, but that allows me to put context around it because it's a persona. Therefore, I can share relevant information to that person or to that persona. I can, ask questions that are relevant to that persona. So I think there's some ways that we can, I don't want to say personalization at scale because I personally think that's an oxymoron. You can't truly personalize at scale. You can target at scale. You can create efficiencies that allow you to do personalization more efficiently. But at scale, as far as like blasting out, that's just not the case. Because there's some, I'll say one more, like right now going back to artificial intelligence, there's some tools out there that are doing quote unquote personalization at scale using AI. But it's like circa it's like LinkedIn circa 1999. Because what they're doing is there's no context, right? Because they're actually using the email that I train, which is the Why You Now email. And the whole concept of the Why You Now is, hey, I was doing some research on your website and I noticed this happened, right? That's the, hey, trigger. And then the reason that prompted me to reach out to you is because many of our clients leverage our solution this way. That's your connection right there. And what they're doing is they're coming up with that value proposition. Hey, here's what we do. And they're using artificial intelligence to do that first line of personalization. With that first line of personalization, I'm getting some of these. It's like, hey, John, I see you're in Boston. Have you bought some legal seafood recently? Do you like the Red Sox? And it's like, are you shitting me? And then it goes like a hard cut to their value proposition. So it's like, I see you're in Boston. Are you a Red Sox fan? We're the leading provider of. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I always remember, and I'm going to throw you a softball here, but you love following up, touching base, checking in. If I know anything about John Barrows, agree or disagree?
Yeah, no, least favorite phrases. I'm still on my crusade 10 years later to get those phrases out. Touching base and checking in are the most meaningless phrases in sales.
You when in your cadences, I've always I remember this though. Am I accurate in saying that your philosophy is don't reference a failed attempt? Because to the point of like crafting the story and one email doesn't cut it. How do you feel about reps that are, I get so many messages where it's, I see that you haven't responded. I see that you may not be interested. Like, that's correct. I have not responded to you. I'm not interested. Say something interesting.
Exactly. No, I think that somebody said that to me early in my career, so never reference. And the main point of that was when you make a cold call, right? Never say, hey, I've called you 5 times in the past, right? I just want to reach out to you again. Because look, if I didn't care the first 5 times, why the hell would I care now? An email, it's kind of the same thing. And that's the problem with the cadence right now. Because what it is it might be one decent email up front. Okay. One decent email that's somewhat relevant to my role or something like that. But then it's, hey, did you get my first email? Bubbling this one up to the top. And then the inevitable breakup email, 1, 2, or 3 stuck under a rock bullshit, right? You should, in my opinion, tell that story with a different reason every single time. Now, you can connect the dots, and that's why going and doing all your research at the same time and telling your story all at the same time is important, because then you can lay it out, right? You can say, okay, what's my first, second, third, fourth, and how am I going to tie these together? Usually for me, it's something to the effect of, hey, on my first email, it's, hey, I was doing some research. I noticed this happened. I'd love to talk to you. Next one is, as I learned more about your business, I actually noticed this, which is why I think, I wanted to talk to you about that. As I dive deeper into your organization, I know this. So I'm focusing on the future and moving forward as opposed to the past. But yeah, I really do strongly believe that you should have a different reason each time. Now, if you have a kick-ass, like if you did some research and you found something that was like, holy shit, like our solution just is a home run on that one, and you really craft a well-written email, I don't have a problem with at least repeating that once, especially if you're using a tool like, some of the email tracking tools that tells you whether they opened it or not. Like if they didn't open it, feel free to use that again. And Sam, back me up. I'm going to flip this over on you for a second. You're SVP of sales, right? And marketing?
I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Behavox. That's where I work, John.
That's right. Sorry, man. So
it's okay. I move around a lot. There's high turnover at the executive level.
But you're a CRO, right? Sam, when was the last time you got a thoughtful, multi-touch contact strategy that wasn't, hey, to get my first email, but literally told a story that was more than one or two, that was 5, 6, 7 touches? When was the last time anybody reached out to you with a thoughtful, multi-touch contact strategy that told a story?
The answer is it's very rare. And I try to be a nice guy, a positive person, because we're all reaching out to people that we don't know. So I try not to be an asshole, but to your point, all I get, that's the reason I asked you, because all I get is you haven't responded. Seems like now might not be a good time. Before I go, I want to make sure. It's like if they had just thought, because by the way, I buy things.
Right.
Like it's not that I'm not a good ICP. Like I buy shit all the fucking time. But think about what I want to buy. And also, by the way, like with a CRO, it's super easy because what do I want? I want leads, I want pipeline, and I want closed business. And if you can relate your product thoughtfully to what we do at Behavox, which is machine learning and big data, back to helping me drive pipeline, and you can think about the customers we sell to, which are big investment banks, I will probably be interested in a phone call.
Yeah. And that's my point, right? Like it happens so rare. And and it's not like you're hiding. Right?
That's the opposite.
Right? Exactly. You're out there, you're doing a podcast for Sales Hacker. I'm sure there's plenty of people out there right now that are listening to this that would love to do business with Behaviorx and you, but yet you don't get thoughtful outreach to, and by the way, I bet you the last person that did it, you remember, right? And it's almost like, especially for example, like CEOs and VPs of sales, I tell sales reps, you want to be the sales rep that SVP or VP wants to hire. So I want to reach out to you in a thoughtful way and be memorable, because after 3, 4, 5, 6 touches to an executive with a thoughtful approach, it's almost like they feel obligated to get back to that person one way or the other. You know what I mean? Well, it might be enough.
When I was at the Muse, this young man, we sold to HR people at the Muse. They sell to HR people. Yep. And he pasted in, he worked for DiscoverOrg, he was an SDR, and he pasted in the org chart of Disney all the way up to their CHRO. And he said, I thought this might be interesting for you because I imagine you sell to big brands like Disney based on the fact that I saw that you sell to all these other brands. Yep. And that turned out to be like a $90,000 4-week sales cycle.
So that's what I'm saying is, to your point of context, right? Taking a step back and really thinking through, what do these people care about? And the difference between sales and messaging and marketing. But here's another example of context content that's easy. The webinar, email. All right, I'm going to give somebody something very tactical to do. I recommend marketing. I wrote a post a long time ago, let marketing market, let sales sell, right? Which means stop putting the sales rep's name on the marketing emails. Everybody knows what a marketing email looks like, and everybody knows it's not a sales rep. Because if Sam, you get 10 emails from John Barrows, and they're obviously marketing emails, right? But yet then I decide to go on your website and do some homework, and I send that email to you, like I'm probably already, in thoughtful email, that type of thing, I'm probably already in the spam filter. Marketing needs to separate. Have those marketing emails come for VP of sales or whatever, but let's talk about the webinar one, right? There's always that, hey, we got this webinar coming up. What I want to do as a sales rep is I want to be on the marketing list so I know when that email goes out to my audience. And then I want to have my tier 1 accounts, my top 25 list, and I'm going to take that email about the webinar and I'm going to forward it to you and say, hey, Sam, I'm sure you probably just got this email. I'm not sure if you saw this email from our marketing department. We're having this webinar coming up here soon. The reason I thought you specifically would be interested in this is this. right? And so that's all you're doing is putting a little bit of context. Now let's take it on the back end. So now say that webinar happens and you don't go to it, right? So you might have signed up for it, but you didn't actually attend. Well, I'm going to then take that and say, hey, Sam, thanks so much for signing up the webinar. I noticed you actually didn't get a chance to attend it. Based on what I know about you, though, if you actually start listening to this webinar at around minute 15 and go from minute 15 to 32, like that's where some really valuable stuff is that I think you and your team might be able to leverage. Here you go. Like if a sales rep would ever do that to me, I would literally lose my shit. I'd be like, oh my God, yep, I don't know what you're selling. Let's talk, right?
You're a busy man, by the way. I'm hearing all these messaging chimes going up, and you're someone. No, it's all good. Before we move off this topic, because there's a natural thought that I imagine a bunch of salespeople out there are thinking. One question I want to ask is, and I see it. I'm on your blog right now. It says cold calling is not dead.
Right.
What's the role of the telephone in the modern sales world, in your opinion?
It's a piece of the puzzle, right? It's no longer any one form of communication. It's all of it, right? So it's email, phone, text, social, all that stuff. But phone, people, it's funny, again, our generation, we grew up with the phone. We're decision makers right now. So guess what? I like talking on the phone. I know the millennial generation, they didn't grow up with the phone. Well, they grew up with it, but they didn't grow up with it as a phone. And so it's not in their DNA to typically make phone calls. And most people don't give them the tools and the skills to be effective on the phone. So it ends up being this negative, like, I don't want to make cold calls. And because I have this bad mentality and I haven't gotten any skills around it, I then try to make phone calls and I get my ass kicked and it doesn't work. So it proves my point. But if you look at phone as, different people like communicating in different ways, right? There's a whole study on neurolinguistic programming around this. If anybody wants to research it, there's a book called Selling with NLP, The Unfair Advantage. And it's about the different types of communicators. And there's visuals, auditories, and kinesthetics, right? Visuals like to see visual things, auditories like to hear things, and kinesthetics like to touch and feel things, right? And since you don't know what type of communicator you're dealing with, you got to mix it up. Because if you send 5 emails to an auditory, your chances of them responding drop. If you make 5 phone calls to a kinesthetic, your chances of them responding drop. So that's why you have to mix it up. And for me, I don't get callbacks, okay? Like if I get a callback, I legit have a heart attack. But the reason I make phone calls is because every once in a while I get through, and I think voice is something you need to practice and get really good at because it's where the future is going anyways with all the Alexa skills and all that stuff. But also I leave voicemails, not because I expect callbacks, but because that when I leave voicemails tied with my contact strategy, my email responses go up.
I think that's such an important point. I mean, I can tell you that at the last few places I've worked, not this place, there's this idea, why are we doing a call blitz? The telephone doesn't work. And it's like, no, that's not the point. It works in context with all of the other communication channels. There's not one thing that works anymore.
Exactly. And that's why, so I'll give it again some tactical stuff here for the like my favorite way of running a call blitz. The problem is most people, like, when I walk into organizations and they have like call blitz days, I'm like, oh God, like gross. Like, I'm sorry, there's not enough Red Bull out there to get me hyped up.
You can't do it all day. You do it for an hour.
An hour, right? So power hours. But the problem is that most sales reps, what they'll do is they'll just get their list and they'll start calling. And I don't know about you, Sam. I am not good enough to call a VP of sales in the SaaS industry, a CRO in the manufacturing industry, a CEO in the healthcare industry, and have relevant, good conversations with each of them. With that, if I'm calling all over the place, I have to be generic with my approach. I have to have a generic elevator pitch and I have to ask generic questions. Unless you're super smart and you can be that dynamic, which I don't know too many people that are. But if I call every CRO in the healthcare industry, I can come up with a message that's specific to them based on what I learn about them and do some research. And I can come up with 2 or 3 questions that are relevant to them that make it sound like I know what I'm talking about. So instead of saying, hey, tell me about your priorities and getting the generic answer that deserves, I say, hey, Sam, you know what? We're typically dealing with CROs in the, behavioral AI industry and and I was wondering, typically they're telling us that the top priority is X, Y, Z. Are those yours, right? Even if they aren't, like the fact that I kind of showed you, I know your world a little bit tells me, opens up the conversation. And then I might have a case study or a story to tell you based on another client that's similar to you. So with that, now I hammer the phones 20, 30, 40 dials, and I can bang out 20 dials in an hour and try that approach. And this is the big thing I really recommend everybody think about, which is Somebody asked me, John, now that you're 42, if you could go back and tell your 22-year-old self something, what would it be? Number one answer to that was A/B split test, right? And split test everything you do. So if you're going after CROs in the financial services industry, come up with 2 different messages to CROs in the financial services industry. Make 20 phone calls with this approach, make 20 phone calls with that approach, and see which one yields a higher response rate, right? And that way you can put it into a cadence, you can put it into a contact strategy and all that other stuff and figure out what works and iterate. And going back to that 1%, getting 1% better every day. If I make 50 dials in a day and don't get any meetings, that's a terrible day. But if I make 50 dials and make 25 with this approach and 25 with that approach, and I still get no meetings, that's actually not a bad day, because I just figured out 2 approaches that don't work. Now, tomorrow I'm going to try a couple new ones. And that's how phone and hour call blitz things is a great part of an overarching contact strategy. That's why, last point I'll make on this is that's why it bothers me with sales training companies out there who are like only social, right? Social, phone's dead, email's dead. Shut up. It's not, it's your target audience. And that's the other thing is like, know your target audience. I joke around, I'm a 42-year-old man on Snapchat. Like, I don't know what I'm doing on Snapchat, but a huge part of my audience, 22 to 28-year-old kids, is on Snapchat or Instagram stories at this point. So I have to be there because that's where they are. So
I was going to correct you about Snapchat and the movement to Instagram stories, but you corrected yourself. So there you go.
Yeah.
Kylie,
Kylie screwed
do
them
you
all.
have a specific voicemail that you leave? Tell the audience what it is.
Yeah, it doesn't start, and it's probably the hardest thing we train, which is it doesn't start with the, hey, this is John Barrows from J Barrows Consulting, right? Because 90% of the time when somebody, if they listen to the voicemail, 90% of the time they're going to delete it right after that, because they either think they know, if they know you, they think they know you, and if they don't know you, they don't care. So what we start off with is going back to the reason for my call, right? So this is what replaces touching base and checking in, where we say, hey, Sam, the reason for my call today, I was on your website and I noticed you're doing some really cool stuff in these areas. And I want to talk to you about how our clients are leveraging our solution to address those challenges that you talked about right there. Could you call me back at 617-529-7271? Oh, by the way, this is John Barrows with J Barrows Consulting, 617-529-7271. So you start with the reason for my call and whatever that is, and then you back it up with your name. Because what it does is there's a pattern interrupt factor there, right? Because every single voicemail sounds exactly the same. And then you come in with, hey, Sam, the reason for my call, right? So it's different. Second is it literally forces them to listen to the value proposition, right? Like, because everybody wants to know who it is before they hang up that phone. So it's like, oh, damn it, who is this? And oh, shit, I didn't even know you guys did that. And then the third benefit is, and I always joke, if you screw up halfway through, you can hang up and they have no idea who you are. So,
Well, that's a new one that I very much appreciate.
Yeah, so that's the fun part, but it's hard. But I'll tell you right now, it took me a couple call blitzes to get that one really to be tight. But man, once it happens, my calls were voicemails 20, 30 seconds. I had more confidence on the phone. I was getting callbacks every once in a while. So I really recommend that structure. Like, pick your intro, what's your reason, what's your call to action, and then your contact information.
I think that is awesome advice as usual. We've only got a few more minutes. So the last question I have on sort of like process stuff, and then I might ask you so you can be thinking about books that we should read or influences, paying it forward, sort of sharing the love with other people that you think are doing great work, in the broadly defined sales space. But before I ask that, you talk about tier 1, 2, 3 accounts, and the example you gave about the webinar, I imagine, meaning the example of like, watch this thing from 15 to 32 minutes because that's the point for you, Mr. VP of Sales or Mrs. VP of Sales or Ms. is some reps are out there saying, John, I don't have the time to do what you are asking me to do. So how do you think about structuring your day so that you can get all of the things you want done?
I always challenge that I don't have the time. I call bullshit on that all day long. I don't know. Every time like reps, so when I do trainings, I'm like, okay, cool. You guys are too busy, right? Sure. Okay. And I open up my calendar and I'm like, Okay. Do me a favor. Tell me somebody in here whose calendar is more ridiculous. And I'm not saying that to brag by any stretch. Trust me, I wish I was less, but I travel 3 days a week and I have Mondays and Fridays to usually do what I do. And usually it's about 15 meetings every day, every half hour, and they're back to back to back to back to back. But I still prospect every day, right? Because and all it is figuring out a replacement. So for instance, I used to get up in the morning and check my fantasy leagues and get all pissed off about that type of crap or whatever. And what I've done now is I've replaced that with my morning routine of checking data feeds on my top tier accounts and writing 2 or 3 really high quality emails every single day so I can get that muscle moving, right? A lot of it has to do with goal setting and blocking and tackling. You know, people are just super inefficient with their time because they make a phone call, they send an email, they go to the bathroom, they, warm up their coffee, they talk about the game, they send another email, they write a proposal. I mean, that's the reason time management is a problem. Let's put it this way. You tell me you're a good multitasker, I'm telling you, you're very inefficient in what you do.
Yeah, multitasking has been debunked.
Of course. I mean, there's a book called The Myth of Multitasking. It's total bullshit. And so, and also momentum means a lot in sales, right? There's other studies that talk about if you have momentum doing something and you stop for any reason, I think it takes somewhere between 8 and 12 minutes to get back to where you were when you re-engage. So that's like, think about it, right? Making cold calls, right? I make a cold call, 3, 4, 5, 6 calls. I get a good conversation. Somebody says, send me information. I stop everything I'm doing. I send this nice custom piece of information like I've never sent it before in my life. And then when I hit send, I kind of feel like I did something, right? So I get up, stretch out a little bit, go warm up the coffee, and I just killed my momentum. So here's another, nugget for everybody. When somebody says, send me information, when I'm doing a call blitz, my questions are what, when, why, what information would you like to see? When would you like to see it and why? And I'll usually preface it, hey, is it okay if I get it to you by the end of the day? Sure. Okay, cool. And then I keep making calls and I schedule an activity to send information at the end of the day because that way I can keep my momentum, right? So my biggest recommendation for everybody is, first of all, get maniacal about goal setting. Smart, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. Set goals every day. Everybody likes crossing stuff off a list, right? So make yourself feel good, right? So put some lists down, cross some things off, focus on the big stuff you got to get away early. I was just having this conversation about this, getting the boulders out of the way. I forget who the conversation was, but it's, in a jar, you put big rocks and you say, oh, is it full? Well, yeah. But then you put pebbles in, you're like, okay, is it full now? And then you put sand in, right? And then it fills it all up. So the idea is to get your rocks out of the way early, right? So that you can feel accomplished and then tackle your pebbles and your sand towards the end. And that's prioritization, right? Important stuff first, second, third, and then block and tackle your day. I recommend everybody do things in hour chunks. Do an hour's worth of this activity and hours worth of that activity. As example, do all your research for your accounts at the same time because you can get very efficient with your research, right? Make all your calls at the same time, send all your emails, those type of things. So if you do things in hour chunks and give yourself breaks in between and you set goals and prioritize them, you have a chance at it and you'll be way more efficient than just going throughout your day. Let's put it this way. If you don't have a plan going into your day, good luck. You might be successful, but you're going to walk home. This is a brutal profession in general, sales. And there are days where if you haven't really planned out your day and set some goals and stuff like that, there are days, weeks, months that could go by where now all of a sudden you're just going to measure yourself on you hitting your quota. That's a brutal existence right there. I like having little wins along the way to keep me motivated here to make sure that I can stay sane.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question on this stuff. What time do you wake up?
I wake up at 6 o'clock these days. I'm trying to get back into working out, but 6 o'clock. And I usually grab my iPhone first and foremost, check out, see if there's any crazy stuff. And then
there usually is these days.
Exactly. Just if there's any like major fires, and then I do a few push-ups, sit-ups, and go get my Dunks coffee, then come back and do my routine of checking through my data feeds, and then kind of start my meetings at around 9 o'clock.
Cool. Books we should read, people we should know about in our last few minutes together. This has been an amazing conversation, but if you wanted to point us in a few directions to sort of keep following the breadcrumb trail, where should we go?
Yeah, I mean, so there's some tools, but I just got this one, Scott McGregor over at Standing O. That book. Scott McGregor is probably he works at Try Something New, right? He put together a book it's called Standing O, which is a bunch of super successful people that talk about who in their lives deserves a standing O. And I'm just big into the positivity right now and trying to spread some goodwill because I just think there's so much negativity going on right now that we need to proactively thank people and appreciate where we are in a lot of cases. So I'm a huge fan of that book. All revenue goes to charity on that one as well. And then, obviously Sales Hacker, I think Max is doing some fantastic stuff. I love what Gong and Drift and those blogs are doing because there's some really cool insights there, and they're really trying to change the game as well. Drift, Armin over at Drift is a real, I had him on my podcast a little while ago, and they're trying to not only upend marketing, but they're trying to upend sales too, and taking a really unique and different approach there. I love Negotiation Ninja. Have you heard of this guy?
No.
Oh man. So Negotiation Ninja, he's gonna get pissed at me for not knowing.
Well, we can Google it. It's all
Yeah.
good.
So go just literally Google Negotiation Ninja. It's one of my favorite podcasts right now because what he's doing, you got to get him on for Sales Hacker because he comes from the procurement side.
Oh my God, that is amazing.
Exactly. Right. So when he brought me on his podcast, I'm like, all right, pal, you and I are going toe to toe right now.
I know. After we get him on the podcast, we're going to torture him to death.
Yeah, I'm like, I absolutely hate you. I'm like, so let's, and we had a blast, right? Because he was telling us what procurement thinks about and how they negotiate, and it's kind of like the magician showing the tricks. So he's one I would totally recommend following because he's got some real, and the Gong one is really cool because all of their stuff is based on data. So their blog is literally one of my favorites because it's purely based on the data, not your gut, not your feelings. And I think we need to leverage data a lot more these days. So those are ones I would pay attention to.
That sounds good. If we want to get in touch with you, if we want to hire Jay Barrows Consulting, if you want us to engage with you in some way, what are your preferred mechanisms? Let's give you your last opportunity to sell us something.
Yeah, I appreciate it. If you go to the website, jbarrows.com, you'll find it all. So I got my Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat is John M. as in Michael Barrows, all one word. And I answer questions on that all day long for reps who have questions. Our Facebook group is killing it. We got a Make It Happen Facebook group on our page where, a ton of members who are really, really actively engaged. And Morgan and I are moderating that, and then always you can email me or hit me up on LinkedIn. It's john@jbarrows.com. And I really do also recommend following Morgan. So Morgan Ingram, I hired him about this point, about 9 months ago, 10 months ago, and the kid's killing it. He just went to India for the first time. His personal brand, if anybody is out there who's 25 years old or in that range and wants to see what a personal brand building does for a career, follow Morgan because, that kid's on a rocket ship right now and I'm happy to have him on my team. So those are all ways that you can get some free. My website has so much free content. We put most of it out there for free. So you can go check that out too.
Awesome. John, it's great talking to you as always. And I'm sure we'll be working together soon. So thanks for your time.
Great catching up, Sam. I appreciate it, man.
Hi, folks. It is Sam's Corner. Thank you for listening. Another great conversation, this time with our good friend, John Barrows, one of the most well-known sales trainers, sales thought leaders in the startup ecosystem. As he said, the guy that teaches Salesforce how to sell. There are always good tips and tactics within the course of a given John Barrows training session, and he referenced a few of them on our podcast. So let me go through a couple things I think it's important to remember. One of them is just make sure you're incorporating the phone. The purpose of the telephone isn't necessarily to isolate that one channel and say the phone works or doesn't work. It works in context with all of your other communication channels. So we've got to think multimedia when we're doing a cadence, when we're doing outreach to folks, and it has to include email, it has to include voicemail, it has to include phone call without leaving a message, it has to include a LinkedIn message, but also looking at their LinkedIn profile as one of the touch points. So use the telephone. It works in conjunction with everything else. I think Derek Grant in an earlier podcast said the Sales Loft has done some research and they've identified that it's the voicemail first plus a follow-up email that gets the highest response rate. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And then when you're leaving a voicemail, don't just say your name. Hi, it's Sam Jacobs from BehaveVox. Say the reason for my call is blah, 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 and have your name and the phone number. And your name is sandwiched between the phone number twice. So repeat the phone number twice, but the name in the company only once. And you started off with the reason for my call is. So those are some strategies. And I guess the final piece is just make sure that it's personalized. Block out your day. There's no reason why you can't have a list, as John says, of tier 1 accounts. He mentioned the number 25. Maybe make it 5 to 10 every single month that you can isolate, know everything there is to know about those folks, and make it your mission in life that you're going to get a meeting. Don't just drop everything into a cadence or an automated sequence. Make sure that you're personalizing it and that you're doing thoughtful, constructive outreach. And that is what will get you a response. All you have to do is use empathy to put yourself in the shoes of the buyer, and you will get a response. You just have to think about it. So this has been Sam's Corner, and thank you so much for listening. I'll talk to you next time.
To check out the show notes, see upcoming guests, and play more episodes from our incredible lineup of sales leaders, visit saleshacker.com and head to the podcast tab. You'll find the podcast on iTunes or Google Play. I find this part strange to read because you're listening to the podcast, so you know where the podcast is. But anyway, that's where you'll find us: iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, any other place that podcasts appear. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your peers. It doesn't have to be your peers. Share it with anybody. We don't care. We just want you to share it. Please share it on LinkedIn, Twitter, or elsewhere. Imagine elsewhere is Facebook or Instagram, but I think LinkedIn is probably the best place. And then if you want to get in touch with me, find me on Twitter. I'm at Sam F. Jacobs, or at LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Sam F. Jacobs. Once again, a huge shout out to our sponsors. If you haven't visited our sponsors, they're the reason that we can bring all these guests on. They turn the lights on for the podcast and turn the earbuds on, or AirPods, whatever you're listening to this on. So here's our two sponsors: AirCall, your advanced call center software, complete business phone and contact center, 100% natively integrated into any CRM, and Outreach, a customer engagement platform that helps efficiently and effectively engage prospects to drive more pipeline and close more deals. Thank you for listening. I will see you next time.